Now, Nolan's Odyssey is being actively criticized for many things, but is it really that bad?
Wow.
That's very interesting.
Or were the early adaptations also far from the ideal, but eventually gained audience recognition? Shouldn't we wait for the film to be released and evaluate it as a complete work, instead of making a final verdict based on trailers alone? In this video, I'll be doing a major research comparison of Homer's epic poems with their most famous film adaptations and Nolan's upcoming film. According to many viewers, the most popular is considered to be Wolfgang Petersen's epic Troy. Next up is Konchalovsky's 1997 Odyssey, the third film adaptation of Franco Rossi's Odyssey, and the famous producer Dino De Laurentiis is the least known in the world, but highly appreciated by fans of Homeric adaptations, but is now outdated and for many will become a tedious ordeal to watch. I won't even mention the less than successful adaptations like The Return with Ralph Fiennes, which focuses solely on the hero's return to Ithaca, or the 1944 film with Kirk Douglas, which is heavily bridged and skims over Odysseus' immense journey in 2 hours. And Helen of Troy is a television romantic melodrama. It feels like a low-budget soap opera with weak fight choreography and a significant departure from the myths. Troy could also be considered a very loose adaptation. The creators removed the gods from the story, staged wars only between mortals, and the gods had no influence on human destinies. The characters' behavior, personalities, and life outcomes were greatly altered. Hollywood producers relied heavily on the plot, emphasizing spectacle and Hollywood gloss. If you don't know the Greek myths and watch the film without knowledge of the original source, the film looks quite organic. As an independent work about the fall of Troy and the culprits, Paris and Helen, because of whom the war broke out. Let's dig deeper and compare which major events the writers changed and which ones they left intact. In the film, the entire war is condensed into a few weeks, but in the poem, the war at Troy is already in its 10th final year. The film opens with a depiction of the war between the Mycenaeans and Thessalia for the unification of Greece. The scene where Achilles slays a giant with a single leap fulfills a Hollywood purpose, effectively setting up the hero. Homer has known of this. All events take place in Troy, and the story begins with a conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles over the captured Trojan maidens, Chryses and Briseis. And it all begins with the wrath of the gods, when Agamemnon refuses to return Chryses to her father. Her father prays to the gods and they send a plague upon the Greek army. Agamemnon finally agrees to return Chryses, but in exchange he wants to take Achilles' beloved captive, Briseis. This is where the conflict with Agamemnon arises and the reason why Achilles refuses to fight for the Greeks, sitting out most of the war in the camp. In the film, Briseis is a Trojan princess, a priestess of Apollo, and Hector's cousin, who becomes Achilles' primary love interest. In the poem, she becomes part of the spoils during one of Achilles' raids on Troy, and is not related to Priam or Hector. In the film, Achilles is portrayed as a defiler of the gods. In Homer, Achilles doesn't rebel against the gods. He constantly sacrifices to them, obeys their orders without question. In the Iliad, after a quarrel, Achilles asks his mother, the goddess Thetis, for Zeus to help the Trojans defeat the Greeks, so that they will understand that without Achilles they are nothing. In the film itself, Thetis appears only briefly as Achilles' ordinary mortal mother. In the film, Paris and Helen fall deeply and consciously in love in Sparta. Helen is unhappy in her marriage to the abusive, hard-drinking Menelaus, who sees her only as a trophy. Even when war breaks out, she remains faithful to Paris. In the poem, the story of Paris and Helen itself begins long before Homer's Iliad. The myth of the Apple of Discord begins with the wedding of the mortal hero Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis, the future parents of Achilles. King Zeus did not invite Ares Paris, the goddess of discord. Believing her presence would ruin any celebration, an angry Ares secretly entered the feast and tossed a golden apple onto the table, inscribed with the words to the fairest. The three most powerful goddesses of Olympus began to lay claim to the title. Hera, the supreme goddess, wife of Zeus. Athena is the goddess of wisdom and just warfare. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Zeus was tasked with choosing the winner, but he refused, fearing to offend his wife Hera or other contenders. He shifted the responsibility to immortal shepherd Paris. Even before his birth, Prince Paris was prophesied to burn Troy. After his birth, the infant was abandoned in the mountains to his death, but he was rescued and raised by shepherds. At the time of the goddess's judgment, he simply did not yet know he was a prince. The goddesses tried to bribe him. Hera promised to make him ruler of all Asia and grant him absolute power. Athena promised to make him the greatest military strategist and sage. Aphrodite promised him Helen as a wife. Young Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite. From that moment on, Hera and Athena mortally hated Paris, his family and all of Troy. Aphrodite helped Paris regain his princely status, come to Sparta and kidnap Helen. That's why throughout Homer's poem, Aphrodite aided the Trojans and Hera and Athena aided the Greeks. To win this beauty contest, they unhesitatingly ruined the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. The second reason is Paris's love affair and passion led to war and the fall of Troy. Still, the root cause of the Trojan War is female vanity. Myths describe Helen living peacefully in Sparta, raising a child and content with her husband, Menelaus. When Paris arrived in Sparta as a guest, Aphrodite personally intervened. She cast a spell on Helen and cast a mad, blinding passion for Paris. Helen sailed to Troy as if in a trance, submitting to someone else's will. And when Aphrodite's spell temporarily weakened, Helen was horrified by what she had done. She began to despise Paris for his cowardice and weep for her home. But the goddess of love kept a watchful eye on her toy. Now it becomes clear to us that in the original story, it wasn't just Paris who was to blame, but also Aphrodite's power. In the film, Troy was significantly simplified, making mad human love the cause of tragedy. However, in the context of real life, such things actually happen. Therefore, this approach to dramaturgy is very effective. In the film, Hector is angry at Paris for kidnapping Helen, but his brotherly feelings are much stronger. He defends Paris when he crawls him on his knees during the duel with Menelaus, and for his brother's sake, he breaks the laws of honor by killing the Spartan king. In the poem, he openly calls his brother the cause of disasters and a womanizer, accusing him of cowardice. Hector harshly shames Paris when he is frightened by Menelaus during their first encounter on the battlefield. Menelaus defeats Paris, but in the poem, Paris is saved by the divine power of Aphrodite, while Hector does not intervene and silently watches. Ultimately, Menelaus remains alive in the poem and will generally be the character who outlives almost all the other characters. Even before the creation of the Trojan horse, during one of the invasions of Troy, Paris kills Achilles with an arrow to the heel. He then dies from a poisonous arrow from the Greek warrior Philoctet. Before his death, Paris begged his first wife Oenon for help, as she knew how to heal any wound. But Oenon, offended by Paris's abandonment of her for Helen, refused him. Paris died in agony. After Odysseus creates the Trojan horse and the Greeks invade Troy, Menelaus plots to kill Helen. By this time, Helen had been forced into marriage with another Trojan prince, Deiphobus. When he finds her and brutally murders Deiphobus, she strips naked and captivates him with her beauty. Menelaus forgives her and returns with her to his homeland after the war. In the poem The Odyssey, Homer depicts Menelaus and Helen years later. They are once again living happily together in their opulent palace. The film shows a secret exit through which Paris and Helen, Hector's wife Andromache, and their child Astyanax escape, and briefly shows a young Aeneas, to whom Paris hands the Trojan sword. In the Iliad, Aeneas is a very important character, almost the most powerful mortal Trojan after Hector. In the film, however, he is depicted as an unnamed refugee boy. According to Virgil's great poem, the Aeneid, it was Aeneas who gathered the surviving Trojans, took them overseas to Italy, and his distant descendants Romulus and Remus founded Rome. The Sword of Troy showed that the fall of Troy wasn't the end of history, but the hidden beginning of the great Roman Empire. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why Italians are so drawn to the story and have made their own Odysseus. So, in the poem, there is no secret exit, and Andromache and her child suffered a terrible fate. The Greeks threw the infant Astyanax from the Trojan wall onto the rocks below, and Andromache was captured as a concubine by Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. Neoptolemus also killed King Priam. In the poem, Agamemnon is a proud, vain, but internally weak king. He fears the wrath of the gods, is able to admit his mistakes, and relies heavily on the advice of other leaders. In the film, Agamemnon is calculating tyrant and conqueror. He does not believe in the gods, uses religion as a tool of power, and is driven not by revenge but by a thirst for world domination. In the Iliad, Agamemnon's conflict with Achilles ends in reconciliation. After Patroclus' death, Achilles himself comes to Agamemnon. The king returns Briseis untouched and gives him generous gifts. They fight together again. Agamemnon survives the Trojan War. In the film, no reconciliation occurs. Agamemnon's ending is rewritten in the film for instant karma. During the sack of Troy, he finds Briseis and mocks her, at which point Briseis kills Agamemnon. Achilles finds him already dead. Agamemnon dies in other myths after returning to his homeland. The minor character Ajax Telamonides dies by Hector's sword during the first large-scale assault on the Trojan walls. In the poem, everything ends quite differently. Ajax and Hector fight evenly and in a draw. Afterwards, they exchange gifts as a sign of respect. Hector gave Ajax a sword, and Ajax gave Hector a belt. Ajax died much later, after Achilles' death. The film screenwriters rewrote this line to emphasize that only Brad Pitt can defeat Hector in the film Troy. In the film, during the duel between Menelaus and Paris, Hector breaks the truce by treacherously killing Menelaus. In the poem, after Paris disappears in a mist created by Aphrodite, Athena appears and takes the form of a Trojan, promising the Trojan archer Pandarus glory and wealth from Paris if he shoots Menelaus. Pandarus wounds Menelaus and turns the Trojans into oath-breakers. Another major omission in the film is the absence of a key character. The fearless Diomedes, comparable in strength to Achilles, who played a key role in the battles in the poem and nearly killed Hector twice. In the film, Achilles is given the upper hand. Without him, nothing can be done. He was simply removed from the script because another of the strongest heroes would have been superfluous on screen. In Troy, Hector often displays mercy and nobility during battle, and after killing Patroclus, whom he didn't recognize in Achilles' armor, he behaves with dignity. In the Iliad, Hector behaves much more brutally. Homer compares him to a mad dog devouring fire, a lion or a boar. He dreams of completely wiping out the Greek army so that no one will return home. Unlike the film, Homer's Hector did not kill Patroclus in a fair, one-on-one duel. First, the god Apollo stunned Patroclus in the back, then the Trojan Euphorbus wounded Patroclus between the shoulder blades with a spear. Only then did Hector approach the exhausted Patroclus and finish him off with a spear thrust to the groin. Hector knows full well whom he is killing. Immediately after the murder, Hector brutally tore the armor from Patroclus' body and immediately donned it as a trophy. Homer explicitly states that Hector intended to cut off Patroclus' head with a sharp sword, impale it on a pike, and throw the decapitated body to the Trojan dogs. Ajax the Great and Menelaus staged a horrific hours-long massacre around Patroclus' corpse precisely to prevent Hector from carrying out this horrific plan. The Greeks eventually recaptured the body and returned it to a weapon Achilles. Incidentally, Achilles couldn't fight Hector without his armor, so his mother Themis asked Hephaestus to make him new ones. In the film, Patroclus secretly steals Achilles' armor and sets off with the Myrmidons to battle the Trojans. In the poem, he is encouraged to do so by the old leader Nestor and Achilles himself. Homer's Patroclus is a mature man older than Achilles and who would not steal other people's things. Unlike the Patroclus on screen, he is Achilles' young cousin and apprentice, whom he prevents from going to war. In the poem, the elder Nestor himself suggests to Patroclus that Achilles give Patroclus his armor and sent him to intimidate the Trojans with his appearance, and in the film Nestor plays a small role as Agamemnon's advisor. Achilles, hearing this from Patroclus, agrees. He personally gives Patroclus his armor and sets a strict condition: drive the Trojans away from the ships, save the fleet, and return immediately. Unlike the film where Hector fearlessly confronts any enemy in the poem's finale, upon the scene in the enraged Achilles in Hephaestus' shining armor, Hector is overcome with primal terror. Instead of accepting a fair fight, he flees from Achilles in panic 3 times around the walls of Troy. The goddess Athena is forced to resort to a vile deception to force him to fight. In the guise of his brother Deiphobus, Athena appears to him and offers to fight Achilles together. But then Athena disappears, and the deceived Hector is left alone and dies at the hands of Achilles. In the poem, Achilles is portrayed as cruel and heartless, sparing no one even when they kneel before him and beg for mercy. In the film, Achilles enters Troy solely to rescue Briseis, and along the way, he doesn't kill the man who begs him for mercy. This is because his heart softens out of love for Briseis and after he forgives Hector and his conversation with Priam. In the poem, Achilles, blinded by his victories and his own invincibility, falls into mad pride and, in an attempt to take Troy, is killed by Paris' arrow. The Iliad ends with Hector's funeral, long before the fall of the city and before the appearance of the Trojan horse. Horse is mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, which is where Wolfgang based the final section for his film. As we can see, the creators had to greatly cater to Hollywood, making numerous changes while somehow preserving the integrity of the poem and appealing to a mass audience. I believe they succeeded and were able to captivate fans of high-quality historical dramas. Therefore, even today, Troy, although quite non-canonical, remains the best film adaptation of the Iliad and perhaps the most spectacular adaptation of Homer's works. I won't compare it to the Coen brothers adaptation, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Although it's high quality and arguably beats Troy in terms of dramaturgy and screenplay. After all, the events take place in our time and are based on a different story, using only motifs from Homer's myths. Franco Rossi's television series is the most accurate depiction of Homer's poem. The script included almost all the key mythological episodes. Rossi's project is unique in that it preserves Homer's complex composition. The narrative begins not with the Trojan War, but retains the first 4 chapters of Homer's Telemachy. As in the poem, the story of past travels is presented in flashback, like Odysseus' personal account at King Alcinous's banquet. In terms of its running time, 8 episodes, each 50 minutes long, and the comprehensiveness of its events, this version is unrivaled. Konchalovsky's version is more closely reminiscent of the Hollywood approach, embracing spectacle with visual effects and the most epic episodes from Homer's text. Many lines are shortened or rewritten to heighten the drama. Several of Odysseus' stops are removed, but the appearance of the gods remains faithful to Homer's poem. Konchalovsky structured the drama chronologically. Film begins with the birth of Telemachus, continues with the Trojan War, and only then moves on to his wanderings. Homer's story within a story structure is completely eliminated. Similar to Interstellar or Inception, for Nolan, The Odyssey is primarily a metaphor for the insurmountable mental or physical distance between a person and their loved ones, rather than a literal retelling of ancient myths with monsters and gods. Christopher Nolan himself has admitted that Andrei Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev and Akira Kurosawa's Ren were the main inspirations for his film's atmosphere. He sought the characters' interaction with mud, wind, and storms. The choice of Emily Wilson's translation made Nolan's version completely different from the classic works. Previous translators and directors idealized Odysseus as a flawless, majestic, and noble warrior. Wilson translated the poem's famous first Greek word polytropos not as cunning or wise, but as complicated. Nolan seized on this interpretation. His Odysseus is a deeply traumatized, complex, and mentally confused man, not a pompous epic hero. Historically, translators have intentionally used archaic, poetic, elevated language to emphasize the text's antiquity. Emily Wilson has argued that for the ancient Greeks themselves, Homer's language sounded vivid, rapid, and understandable. Nolan has transferred this concept to the screen. The dialogue in his film is devoid of theatrical pathos. It sounds modern, colloquial, and utterly banal. In all the translations, Penelope and Odysseus and maidens were portrayed as harlots and traitors deserving of death. Wilson restored the literal Greek meaning of the text. These women were slaves who physically lacked the right to choose. This emphasis makes the slaves unwitting victims of circumstance. It would be absurd for the director to portray Odysseus as guilty of murdering these slaves because of his PTSD. In the work itself, Odysseus asks his faithful nursemaid Eurycleia to determine which of the 50 slaves in the palace have remained loyal and which have betrayed the house. Eurycleia clearly identifies 12 servants who have behaved inappropriately and are executed for their personal transgressions. Homer's text clearly defines the limits of cruelty and mistreatment of certain women. Nolan's one-sided decision to use Emily Wilson's translation is a hidden pretext for pushing yet another agenda involving Hollywood politics. However, it's possible Nolan will retain his signature style. In that case, The Odyssey is a perfect fit for his love of non-linear storytelling and playing with time. Homer's epic constantly shifts timelines, allowing the director to use flashbacks and parallel plotlines much more boldly than in previous adaptations. The main reason for the criticism of Nolan's upcoming film is the rumors surrounding Elliot Page's role as Achilles, which has been the subject of numerous mocking videos. However, it has been revealed that he will play a small role as Sinon, a relative of Odysseus who is not mentioned in the Iliad and Odyssey but appears in later Greek works. Therefore, this issue is closed and we can breathe a sigh of relief. Another striking feature is the casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen. Another controversial point is that Lupita also plays Clytemnestra, who betrays her husband upon his return. Nolan explains this is because Helen and Clytemnestra were cousins and shared difficult fates, each suffering at the hands of gods and men. Actress Lupita Nyong'o urged those critical of her casting as Helen to remember that this is a mythological story. The Odyssey spans many worlds. That's why the cast is the way it is. We are participating in an epic narrative of our time. According to her logic, one could take African mythology as a basis and instead of Africans, cast half-white actors and it would be acceptable. Nolan came to similar conclusions, having had various projects under his belt in which Nolan emphasized scientific concepts, time traveling, and the philosophy of ideas. Nolan suddenly decided to become a cosmopolitan good Samaritan. Thus, Nolan simplifies and liberally interprets many details of ancient Greek myth. He makes armor, weapons, and the appearance of warriors and giants rather conventional, prioritizing spectacle and striking shots over historical or mythological accuracy. In the 1968 Italian version, the warriors' clothing and weapons look somewhat sparse and cheap, despite the project being produced by the renowned Dino De Laurentiis and television productions of the time considered expensive and ambitious. Nevertheless, technically and visually, it now looks somewhat dated. Armand Assante is considered by many to be the best Odysseus. He perfectly embodied Odysseus's weight and animalistic cunning charisma. However, Assante was nearly 40 years old at the time of filming. In the opening scenes at the walls of Troy, he appears too mature for a young king who had just fathered a son. Matt Damon's Odysseus at the time of filming was around 55 years old. His appearance has undergone virtually no digital de-aging. Over 20 years of wandering, the only noticeable age-related change is gray hair. By comparison, Assante's Mediterranean appearance better matches the classic image of the Greek hero than Matt Damon's Northern European appearance. Yugoslav actor Bekim Femiu in Franco Rossi's version was the most age-appropriate for the role of the young Odysseus. The 31-year-old Femiu looked completely natural in these scenes. After 20 years of wandering and warfare, Odysseus Femiu effortlessly conveyed the image of a man prematurely aged by grief, storms and war. Konchalovsky had only 3 hours hours, so the action is electric and the Santee's emotions are driven to the limit. Franco Rossi had a meditative, unhurried narrative that requires the hero to be a contemplative. Barkimphemeu plays as a monumental, reserved ruler. An interesting fact is that Greek actress Irene Papas, who is most authentic as the Greek wife, played 2 roles in 2 versions of the Odyssey. In Franco Rossi's version she plays Penelope, and in Konchalovsky's version she plays Odysseus' mother Anticlea. Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy is a complete miscasting of the ancient Greek divine image. Helen, as the daughter of Zeus, was to be perceived as a bearer of divine radiance, and her fair hair served as a sign of her exceptionalism. Diane Kruger remains the best screen Helen. Her blonde hair, refined features, and aristocratic beauty create the very image of the woman for whom, according to legend, people were willing to go to war. After Diane Kruger, of course, comes the Italian version of Helen, Scilla Gabelle. Her perfect features, sultry curves, and expressive figure with lily-colored skin perfectly accentuate the image of a truly beautiful woman. Interestingly, in real life, Scilla Gabelle is fair-haired, but in Franco Rossi's series she is given dark hair. Why did the director change one of Helen's most recognizable features? Rossi was likely striving for a more realistic portrayal of Mediterranean people, which is why he depicted almost all the main characters with dark hair. There are no real complaints about Tom Holland as Telemachus. In terms of both age and appearance, he closely matches the character as portrayed in previous adaptations. The same goes for Robert Pattinson as Antinois, whose portrayal also remains consistent with the classic versions. Athena Zendai
is like, you know?
Homer describes Athena with the epithet Glaucopis owl-eyed, which refers to her large, light eyes. Konchalovsky's portrayal of Athena, played by Isabella Rossellini, was well suited to the role. At the director's behest, she wore special contact lenses during filming. The cinematographer deliberately emphasized them with lighting. Her gaze is truly owlish wise, all-seeing, perfectly matching Homer's description. The most accurate portrayal of Calypso is Kira Bester from Franco Rossi's version. In Homer, Calypso is an immortal nymph, possessing eternal youth and perfect beauty. The actress was approximately 25 years old at the time of filming. She perfectly captures the image of a young blooming nymph. Konchalovsky's Calypso features an actress of mixed African and European descent. She took on the role at age 34. Her portrayal is less canonical than Homer's, but still possesses its own appeal and maturity. Charlize Theron looks the least like Calypso. The actress was between 49 and 50 years old at the time of filming. She was likely chosen because she was similar in age to Damon, so they would work better together as lovers. Aside from her age, Theron, with her fair hair, looks quite good in the role. Himesh Patel, a British actor of Indian descent, plays Eurylochus, Odysseus' closest relative and his companion during the voyage home after the Trojan War. Patel is a complete miscast. In ancient Greek mythology, Eurylochus is described as a Greek of noble birth from the island of Cephallenia, an island neighboring Ithaca. Eurymachus, or Polybus, one of the suitors in Ithaca, played by Corey Hawkins and Travis Scott as the bard. There is really nothing more to add. Meanwhile, Corey Hawkins, a black man, plays the man who was the Greek Penelope. Such a relationship would have been unimaginable at the time. If Travis Scott actually performs modern rap instead of reciting ancient epic poetry, the whole thing will become a complete laughingstock. Circe is played by the 49-year-old British actress Samantha Morton. Again, there is a discrepancy in age. In Konchalovsky's version, actress Bernadette Peters was also 49 years old. In Franco Rossi's version, 32-year-old actress Juliette Ménil had a classic, cold and aristocratic French beauty. Her appearance is more canonical to Homer, with the exception of her hair color. Ultimately, Franco Rossi's version wins out in terms of script and casting. In terms of direction, drama, and ability to captivate the audience, Armand Assante's The Odyssey takes first place. If we compare all the adaptations of Homer's works, Nolan's main main rival would likely be Wolfgang Petersen's Troy. In terms of scale, emotional power, this film is quite capable of giving it a run for its money. Overall, the color grading and color palette of Troy convey the spirit of ancient Greece much better. By contrast, the dark blue and somber tones of Nolan's film feel less consistent with the sunlit world of Greek mythology, so often associated with azure seas, white marble, and the golden radiance of Mount Olympus. The most important aspect is the ability to convey the spirit of the Homeric epic, where myth is closely intertwined with the inner world of man. This is where Andrei Konchalovsky's version shines most. In ancient Greek culture, hubris, pride and insolence before the gods was considered one of the gravest sins. Konchalovsky makes this idea the central tenet of his film. From the proud conqueror of Troy, he transforms into a weary man, dreaming only of returning home and embracing Penelope and Telemachus. At the same time, Konchalovsky preserves the poem's core fairy tale element. This gives the adaptation a distinctly Greek mythological feel, not just a historical adventure. Episodes involving the Lastrygonians have been completely eliminated, as has the island of Hellas and the story of the sacred bulls, and the poem Odysseus' companions die not by chance, but as punishment for their sacrilege, violating the gods' prohibition. In the film, their deaths seems less logical. Furthermore, the famous episode with the sirens is missing. Although the visual effects of the late 1990s now look conservative, Konchalovsky's work remains impressive even after all these years. The main strength of Franco Rossi's version is its utmost respect for the spirit and structure of Homer's epic. Rossi doesn't attempt to reimagine Odysseus or make him a modern hero. He portrays him as Homer describes him. The director leaves the plot largely unchanged, preserving most of the poem's key episodes, including the encounters with the sirens, Hellas' island with its sacred bulls, and the final epilogue with the reconciliation of Odysseus and the relatives of the murdered suitors. However, this very fidelity to the source material also proves to be the adaptation's main weakness. The narrative unfolds slowly, many scenes rely on lengthy dialogue, and the staging often resembles a theatrical production. It lacks the spectacle and the dramatic tension of later versions. Nevertheless, it's precisely thanks to this restraint that Rossi's Odyssey remains one of the most faithful film adaptations of the poem. Nolan film's main strength will likely be its production design. The huge budget, real-life filming in the various countries, expensive sea scenes, and Nolan's signature style could make Odysseus' journey an epic film. The main intrigue remains how Nolan will portray the gods. If the influence of the gods is minimized or given a symbolic explanation, the film could become more of a historical drama with elements of mythology, as was the case in the film Troy. Knowing that Nolan relied on Emily Wilson's translation, one might expect the scene of the maid's punishment to be significantly altered compared to Homer's original. In the poem, after the suitors are murdered, the 12 maids accused of adultery are first forced to clear the whole of their bodies and then, on Telemachus' orders, hang them. It's quite possible that Nolan will ditch the hanging scene entirely. This has already happened in previous adaptations. Andrei Konchalovsky's adaptation omits this scene entirely, and Franco Rossi's series merely hints that the handmaids will be punished without showing the execution itself. The reason for such changes is obvious. In today's world, such a brutal massacre could transform Odysseus and Telemachus from heroes into ruthless killers. Moreover, with a budget of 250 million, Universal is unlikely to want to risk the mass execution of women. For the ancient Greeks, this massacre was not without its insane cruelty, the restoration of a disturbed world order, and retribution for the violation of sacred state hospitality. If Nolan finds the courage to portray it as a tragic, bloody, and inevitable denouement, where the hero himself crosses the line of humanity, then it will be the most honest embodiment of the Odysseus' ending on screen. If he softens or alters the scene, it will mean that the demands of modern Hollywood and commercial calculations will prove stronger than the ancient worldview. The Odyssey was written nearly 3,000 years ago. The text is meant to read like an artifact of a bygone era, not like a modern novel. Therefore, the mass boycott of the modern, hackneyed, typical dialect of phrases and lines of characters is a completely justified behavior and harsh criticism of the audience towards the simplified Hollywood language. And now the main paradox is why the film will still make money, despite the fact that it has a priori skeptical audience sentiment before its release in cinemas. The phenomenon of toxic box office success works without fail, especially when it comes to projects of this scales. Negative word of mouth has a colossal power to attract people. People are tempted to see this nightmare with their own eyes. For millions of people around the world, Nolan is a director turned attraction. Even those who criticize him in advance for the potential collapse of the Homeric spirit will still buy an IMAX ticket. Viewers will go for the scale, sound and image, consciously overlooking all the reasons why they were already biased against the film. Nolan's Odyssey, shot on 70mm film, will offer unprecedented spectacle. A colossal animatronic Cyclops storms filmed on location rather than on green screen. Even if the textual component turns out to be empty, the mass audience's visual hunger will be satisfied. Furthermore, the film is being released at the height of the summer season, traditionally the most profitable period for major blockbusters. The film has been rated 17+, which may further attract audiences who prefer more serious, gritty and dark films over family adventures. For me personally, Christopher Nolan is one of the best directors of our time. I believe and hope that with his new work he will refute all this negative hype from audiences. And if I'm wrong, then we can officially declare that the film industry has swallowed up yet another renowned director in its glossy commercial conveyor belt and ruined his successful career. Or perhaps the director himself has strayed from the right path and sided with evil. That's all for now. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, like, hit the bell, stay tuned, see you soon.